Okay, introduction to SATB writing. First things first, we're going to go through some ground rules for simply organizing your pitches when you're writing an SATB texture. First thing to know, and this might be common knowledge to you if you're used to reading off of these types of scores, in which case you can just speed on along. But if not, when we're talking about SATB texture, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, we're dealing with 4 separate voices spread over 2 staves. So we have our treble staff, and that houses our soprano and alto. And then our bass staff houses our tenor and our bass. Now, when you are notating in this 4-voice texture, one of the things to keep in mind is that each of your voices is kind of its own entity. So the sopranos are their own thing, and the altos are their own thing, tenors and basses. In order to keep them straight visually, not only do we separate them into the 2 different staves, treble and bass, but we also designate a stem direction for each of them. So your sopranos, which are going to be on the uppermost part of the voicing, whenever you have a soprano pitch that requires a stem, that stem is going to go up. Think of it as you don't want the soprano and alto stems colliding. You want them out of the way. So the soprano stems are going to go up so that they stay out of the alto's lane. Similarly, the altos are going to stem downward to get out of the soprano space. Same principles apply on the bass staff. So your tenors will stem up, and that keeps them out of the way of the basses, who will stem down. That's just some housekeeping to keep your chords nice and clear and to keep all of the separate voices out of one another's way. Now, when we're building triads in this texture, there are a couple things to keep in mind, and we're going to kind of pass through all of them as we build a couple of chords together. So I'm going to just put us arbitrarily in a key over here. So let's say I'm going to tell us we're in G major. When you're building triads off of a Roman numeral, which is what we'll be doing, the Roman numeral gives you all of the information you need in terms of what pitches you need. So let's say we're in G major and I'd like you to build a 1 chord in SATB texture. Your first step is figuring out, okay, what notes do I need in order to build this 1 chord? So you might just want a little extra workspace. I left you some space on the left. So one quick way to figure out what notes you need is to build that root position stacked like a snowman triad in a margin somewhere. So G major, 1 chord, built off of scale degree 1, which is, of course, G. So I'm going to go in on the left-hand margin, and I'm just going to sketch myself. There's G, and I'm going to stack the other 2 pitches on top. So I need a G and a B and a D. And I did this in class Monday as well. I'm also going to write my letter names underneath the Roman numeral. This is actually what I do like in real life. True story. I write the letter names underneath the Roman numeral for a lot of reasons. The biggest one being I can keep track of who I've put on the staff by just crossing them off as I go. So G, B, D, those are the 3 notes you need. However, we are in SATB texture, which means we have 4 voices: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. 3 notes over 4 voices means that somebody is going to be doubled. One of these pitches is going to occur twice in the harmony. So how do we know which pitch to actually double? That is one of the rules that we are going to commit to memory in the next couple of weeks. And that is the rule of doubling. So when you're building a triad in SATB texture, by definition, a triad has 3 unique pitches. SATB texture has 4 voices. So you're going to have to double someone every time when it's a triad. Your first option and your best option is to double the root. Your root is the most important pitch of that harmony. Any triad, the root is the most important note. So if we can double it, we are going to do our best to double it. If you can't, for some reason, and that reason will not happen anytime soon, but in the event that you cannot double the root, your next best option is to double the fifth. And your least best, we try and avoid at all costs. It does happen sometimes, and it probably won't happen for y'all until theory 3, but your least best option is to double the third. Now, for our purposes right now, where we are building triads alone, or we'll be composing 5-to-1 cadences, there is absolutely no reason right now for this upcoming homework that you cannot double the root. So every time for the next 48 hours, you are going to double the root in your triads. So let's go ahead and do that. We've got our G major triad. The Roman numeral actually also tells us who to put in the base. So your Roman numeral and its figured base symbols, if they're present, tell you who's in the lowest voice, right? So if we're looking at this, we're in G major, we've got a 1 chord. There are no figured base symbols. So that means this 1 chord is in root position. What does root position mean? That means the root is in the lowest voice. And we know from this guy over here that our root is G. So that tells us that we are going to put a G in the base voice. So I'm going to go ahead and stick a G with its stem going down in the base voice. Now, I'm going to go down to my little green letter names here, and I'm just going to put a little check under that G. That tells me I put it somewhere, but I know that I'm going to want 2 of them because I'm going to be doubling the root. So I'm going to put that 1 check there, but know that I also need another G somewhere. Now, from here on out, it's a little bit of a free-for-all. You can put, so we need another G, and we also need a B and a D to fill out this triad. You can put them in any of those upper 3 voices, kind of in whatever order you want. There's no rule saying what pitch or what chord member needs to go in what voice. The one rule you do have to keep in mind, though, and this is the other thing that we'll be kind of committing to memory, is our rules about what we call spacing. And spacing is the distance between neighboring voices. And by neighboring, I mean the distance between soprano and alto voices, the distance between alto and tenor voices, and the distance between tenor and bass voices. Those things are really important to this style. So the rules of spacing. Neighboring voices. First thing is they cannot cross one another. And what I mean by crossing is your alto voice cannot end up higher than your soprano voice. Similarly, your tenor voice cannot end up higher than your alto, bass can't be higher than your tenor. Even just looking at that. So when we draw these chords, we want them to be vertical, right? If you look over here, all of my note heads are stacked in a nice straight line. Because of the stem directions of soprano and alto, you actually can't even get them to stack on top of one another when they cross like that. So this voice crossing is breaking one of the spacing rules. Now, just because they cannot cross, though, doesn't mean they can't share. So neighboring voices can't cross, but they can share a note. And what I mean by that is you can have your alto on B here, and you can also have your soprano on B. They can share the same pitch. That is totally fine. Now, your last rule of neighboring voices is, so we've talked about how close they can get. They can share a note, but they can't cross one another. There's also a limit to how far apart they can get. So your neighboring voices have to be within an octave of one another. So scrolling back up here, I hope I'm not making anyone motion sick. Your soprano then and your alto, they can be an octave apart precisely. So this is okay. An octave is your max, though. You cannot go any wider than that. So if I want my soprano up here on an F, and my alto still on an E, that is wider than an octave. And that is breaking one of our spacing rules. So neighboring voices can't cross, although they can share a pitch, and they have to be within an octave of one another. The one caveat is, and I'll put a little star next to it so we don't forget, the bass is what I refer to as an independent voice in terms of spacing rules. That means nobody cares how far it gets from the tenor. The bass can be as far away as it wants. Nobody's going to say anything about it. So you only have to worry about these spacing rules as it applies to soprano and alto, and then the relationship between alto and tenor. You do not have to worry about this relationship because the bass can do whatever it wants. It can go as far away as it wants from the tenor. Still can't cross it, but it can be as far away as it wants. And you'll notice that I tend to stick my bass pretty far from my tenor so that I can keep track of it and get it out of the way and not have to worry about accidentally voice crossing with it. So let's go up here and fill out the upper voices for this tonic triad. We've already got one G. I'm going to arbitrarily decide I'm going to put my other G in the alto. And then I'm going to go down here to my chart. I'm going to check it off. I'm done with G's. I've got both of my roots. Now I can move on and fill in the third and the fifth. So again, somewhat arbitrarily, I'm going to decide to put the fifth, let's say in the soprano voice. So I've got my D taken care of. And then last thing I need is a B. Only voice I have left is the tenor voice. Now, if you notice, my tenor and my bass are more than an octave apart, but this is the beauty of the bass being independent. Nobody cares about it. It's fine. I'm going to look at my soprano and alto. They are within an octave of one another and they're not crossing. And then my alto and tenor. They too are within an octave of one another and they're not crossing each other. So we're all good. We have two roots, a third and a fifth. All of our spacing rules are okay. So we have successfully composed a one chord in G major. I'm going to make another video for composing the cadences because this is getting longer than I would like. So I will make another video just for composing authentic cadences. Okay, cool. See you soon.